Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary, the podcast about tending the soul of women, sisterhood, and the rise of the sacred feminine. I'm your host, Arlia Hoffman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary. I'm Arlia Hoffman. And today I am just beyond thrilled to offer what I'm calling a grief roundtable. I have four extraordinary women with me who are have had their own experiences with grief and are also, aware that it impacts every area of our lives and have incorporated it into the work they do professionally. So this is a grief roundtable, and we're going to hopefully dive deep into some of the issues around it, maybe the ways the culture does or does not support its process, and how we cope with it in the real world, given all of that. If you are fresh in grief, and even saying those words can make me a little teary-eyed, because it's, for some of us, it can be just easily accessible. If you're fresh in grief, please take good care of yourself. This episode could be difficult, but it also can be very supportive and helpful. My goal here is that, and my prayer is that anybody struggling with grief, fresh or old or all of that at once, not feel alone, that you feel supported, and that there are resources, there are helpers out in the world for however it impacts your life. What else did I want to say? The enormity of early grief brings an overwhelming number of things to your life, bidden or unbidden, mostly unbidden. And so hopefully in that overwhelming state, you will feel held, supported, and come away with some information. Okay, so I'm going to introduce my esteemed guests and women today. Starting from my visual left is Jenny Lee Schmidt. Jenny is an advanced grief recovery specialist from the Grief Recovery Institute. She's a certified end-of-life coach and a professional certified coach. Jenny's practice focuses on providing grief recovery coaching to high-achieving, high-performing women, owners, entrepreneurs, leaders in business, community, home, women who are used to getting lots of things done and making a big impact, and who are struggling with reduced performance, as well as happiness and satisfaction due to a loss that has left them heartbroken. She teaches a process called the Grief Recovery Method to get really clear about the loss, and then help them release those emotions and get any undelivered communications off their chest. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much. This is indeed a group of esteemed guests. I'm honored to be a part of it. Thanks.
So glad you're here. Susan Pallas Wellness. She's a health coach specializing in helping women reach their happy weight and enjoy a fulfilling relationship with food, their bodies, and themselves. As a pioneer in mind-body wellness, she blends ancient wisdom with modern science to create simple practices and an uplifting approach to serve those who struggle with excess weight, low energy, and chronic stress. Overcoming her own challenges, she encourages women to embrace their obstacles as the way to grow personally and professionally. Welcome, Susan. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Amy Getz, a previous guest on this podcast, is with IRC Wealth. She believes wealth and financial freedom are for everyone. She's a financial advisor and SEC-registered boutique investment firm with IRC Wealth, a CPA, and a certified divorce financial analyst. There's enough grief in divorce, isn't there, Amy?
Absolutely.
Amy's on a mission to educate individuals about their finances and empower them to set big goals for their financial future. Letting go of limiting beliefs around money and facing the real numbers allows people to quiet the stress loop in their minds and elevate everyone around them. Wealth in the hands of good people changes the world. Thank you, Amy, for being here.
Absolutely. What a powerful group of women. My favorite place to be, in powerful groups of women.
Yes. and Rachel Donnelly with Black Dress Consultants. Rachel helps manages the unavoidable task of after loss and legacy planning so that individuals and families can stop wondering what they should be doing and get back to the things that matter. After many experiences with loss, including the death of her parents, Rachel founded Black Dress Consultants, a consulting firm that offloads the administrative tasks that come with legacy planning and after loss, so clients can focus less on the logistics and more on creating space to live worry-free and grieve peacefully. Thank you for being here, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor.
So ladies, this challenging topic is one that we've all dealt with. If you would please just really briefly give us a little context about your experience with loss and how that has impacted your life. And we'll go with whoever jumps in first. Amy.
I'll go. So I experienced loss early in life. In fact, my brother passed away in a car accident. We were just shy of 2 years apart. I was 17 and he was 19. And then my father passed away 5 years later. Honestly, I feel like I have a broken heart over my brother. And so as that relates to me, safety, stability, financial stability was always really important, because having lost my father so young, having lost my brother, I was aware of how important financial security needed as it related to my mother and our future. So oddly enough, probably that early grief is what kind of gave me that foot in the door into focusing on financial issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll share next. This is Ginny.
Mhm.
I am one of those who had what you could call a traumatic, chaotic childhood. Lots of family issues, lots of moving around between relatives, lots of loss, lots of change. And it turned me into one of these high achieving perfectionist kind of women. And I see that actually in a lot of women that I serve. You know, we learn that we need to take control early, and then we do a really great job managing the chaos in our lives and performing really well and building big lives. But then sometimes all that loss can come back to really crash in on us. But the main story of my loss that I share is that my grandmother actually raised me, because my parents were divorced and my mom was not really equipped for that job. So my grandmother and grandfather raised me. And then at the end of my grandmother's life, she was declining and needed some care. So I really brought her into my life and managed and supported her during the last decade of her life. She did not live in my house, but she lived a few blocks away, and I was intimately involved. And so when she passed away after 7 years of me really getting to take care of her, that was, you know, those were like the bookends of my life, you know, and that was my real grief experience that I tried to deal with by myself for 9 months. Was really at the end of my rope when I discovered actually the grief recovery method. And it was, you know, life-changing in a number of ways, but really incredibly powerful to cure something that I had thought was uncurable and only going to continue to get worse over 9 months and beyond. So yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll jump in now. This is Rachel, and I had experiences with loss as a teenager. My father got sick when I was 13, and he passed away when I was 16. And then when I had just had 2 small kids and was working full time, I just started a new job. My husband and I had just bought a new home. My mother got sick and passed away pretty suddenly, and her death led me to be in charge of taking care of my uncle, her brother, who was in latter stages of Parkinson's. So now I was settling my parents' estate and all of the ins and outs that come with that, and then taking care of an aging loved one, which he eventually passed away. And I was in tandem an executor 2 times over while trying to raise a family, work full time, and, you know, keep up with the laundry. And it was just completely overwhelming and really hamstrung my grief process. I did not have the space, the time, the ability, the brain space to grieve, because I was so inundated with tasks of death, the business of death and the business of aging. So that's, was my different experience.
Susan?
So I had a chaotic growing up as well. And yeah, and the losses that I had, I was the one who would put on the brave face and keep going. And I remember my sister would cry and then she'd be done. And 5 years later, I'm still having issues with things. And I didn't learn how to understand my feelings or even feel them. And so when my father died, probably 20 years ago, I grieved him when I knew he wasn't going to get better. And I did start feeling feelings a little bit better. But my mom passed away in January, a year and a half ago. And I remember being in denial when we saw that she wasn't going to live. And I remember, just kind of being okay with denial. Okay, I want to be in denial about this. And then when I saw she might not get better. And then I really was able to feel the feelings of it, so that when she did pass, I was able to be present with my brothers and sisters and feel all of her and feel the feelings. But what I didn't expect was I didn't know how to not do life, because I'd always just kept going on. And so my son, a month later, but she died in January 3rd, and February 4th, my son was in a bad car accident. He was a passenger and broke his hip and was in the hospital, and, for months of rehabilitation. And I remember someone asking me, how are you doing? I go, I don't think I'm okay. Like, it was just that first time of not feeling okay. And I remember not knowing what to do with that, because I'd always just pushed through. So I'm actually still it's kind of creating a new normal and a healthier one that can go ebb and flow, because I saw addictive patterns trying to keep moving through. So, yeah.
Thank you. For me, my my parents divorced in their 60s when I was fully grown, married with children. And that was my first experience with grief I didn't know how to really process. It was a complicated grief because it was not a happy marriage. So her children were like, oh, finally, but it was nonetheless a challenge. And then within a year and a half, I was divorced, because it just upended my life, and still didn't know how to deal with that grief. I can look back now and say, oh, these are the things that were happening because I was grieving, but I had no context for what to expect and what I was actually going through. And then 6 years ago, from this complicated parental relationship, my father passed. The very week I was visiting my mother, we knew he was passing, so I went to visit her. The very week she was diagnosed with her 3rd round of breast cancer. And so I helped her through that week, funeral, and she passed in 2019, so 4 years ago, within 2 years. It was extraordinary. It was extraordinary with the grief process. It wasn't until my father died, with this complicated, challenging relationship, and then yet there was love, all that mixed bag, that I began to understand my prior grief, and then yet still beginning to pre-grieve what was happening with my mother. I remember asking my therapist, I don't know if I'm just pre-grieving or just coping with what is, and she's like, they don't even try to distinguish that. It just all is. So I don't know about you all, but for me, I had no clue what grief was really like. I didn't understand the breadth of its impact on every area of my life until several experiences, oh, that's why I was doing those things. Because I just didn't know how to cope with the grief. I'd like to move into, as from your grief experience, what was your experience socially, societally, as you were attempting to make sense of your experience and process it? Did you have support? And if you didn't have support, what did it look like? I know, Rachel, you said you and several of you were saying you just had to keep going. You couldn't slow down. Did you have support? And if so, what did it look like? And if you didn't have support, what did that look like?
Yeah, I'll jump into that. I had very little support. I'm still the only one in my friend group who've lost their parents, losing my parents so young. I'm the first one to go through this, really. And so, yeah, no one really knew what I was going through or what that looked like. The word probate was a foreign word to them. And I had also just started a new job. I'd literally started a new job the week my mom was diagnosed, and she passed away a couple of weeks later. I had no time off in the first 90 days. I was on sort of this probationary period. And my mom was diagnosed, died, had major surgery and all that those first 90 days. And I ended up having to leave that job after 8 months to be able to take care of the enormous amount of tasks and logistics and in order to manage that. So not only are you, inundated with those unfortunate circumstances, but then there was, really no one who really knew the hole I was in, for lack of better words. So not only from a supportive a friend group, but in society, we get that, let us know what you need. And then it's a week later, you never hear from them again. And, and then especially in the workplace, it's, what do we do? There's little to no support. And then it's, we'll get back to work. Here's your 3 days of bereavement leave. Have a nice day. Come back. So, which can make it extremely difficult for anybody and everybody.
Yeah. Come back and act like nothing happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the grief recovery world, we have a term for that. And I definitely experienced that too. We call that Academy Award recovery, because we know that we all, and when I say that, we high performing women know what that means, because we put on that face a lot of the times, but particularly when we're grieving, we know that people don't expect us to drop our performance. People want to see our smiling face if that's what they're used to seeing. So, and if we're used to being really large and in charge ourselves, we don't want to lose that self-concept, right? So we, again, try to barrel through it and put on that Academy Award winning performance that everything's fine or it will be fine. But I think we've all echoed that we can carry that for some length of time and then it starts crumbling. And, that was my experience, even though I would say that I had a lot of support. Supportive husbands, supportive friends, even if they didn't understand exactly what I was going through. I was early in my group too, because I lost my grandmother, not my mother, right? So that was a good 10 to 15 years before my peer group. I had a therapist. I had been through lots of other therapy. I thought my head was all screwed on straight. But grief is a different animal, and we don't grow up knowing how to deal with it, and nobody talks about it, right? So you can have all the traditional support structures and still feel kind of lost and alone, and it's almost like every person has to do their own research to figure out how to deal with this new kind of challenge when grief shows up. And that's unfortunate. We need to spread the word about what some of the great tools are.
Yeah, I'm with you, Rachel. I don't, some of my closest friends have not even dealt with the loss of their parents, and it's not something you can even explain. They just are with
it's a club nobody wants to belong to. Sorry, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Susan, Amy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, with my father, I didn't have support. I had a little bit of support, but I didn't know how to actually access it. And even with my family, my family, brothers and sisters, I'm one of 4. And this with my mom, she had done a lot of her own inner work. So she was so much easier to be with, and our family, and she was out of town. So we were all like together, and it was beautiful. it was really cool to see us all as adults and getting along and hearing stories and things that we didn't know. So I've done it without, and I've done it with, and it can be a beautiful time together, just honoring her.
Mhm.
And so, but I didn't have to do but my brother was executor. So but that, I can't even imagine that, because it was hard doing the funeral, preparing all of that. You're in grief and you're having to prepare stuff. And a lot of my stuff came up about being overly responsible, taking on so much, not being able to be prepared. And a lot of that came up, and that was really cool to work through that with my brothers and sisters, being more aware than just being a victim of it. So that was my experience, and it was really good. So
I mean, my experience was in the early 90s. That's when my brother passed, and my dad in the mid 90s. So therapy was not a thing, was not anything that was talked about or offered, not for me, not for my mother. I also had an older brother. Thankfully I had him, but he lived in another state. And so I didn't realize that the effect it had had on me, because it was just kind of put away until later on in life when, I had my own children, and at that point was trying to, work on myself, and then recognizing how much it did affect losing my brother at 17.
Mm.
And then also, as I'm aging, I'm just shy of 3 to 4 years of being the same age my mother was when my father passed. And that really brings it up for recognizing the space that she was in, how young she was, and the lack, I would say, of support that she had. So I'm so grateful that there's resources available now for people, because I didn't have any of that. And because my brother's was a tragic death and my dad's he was very young, it was almost like people just didn't want to talk about it, right? Let's just pretend that all is well. Let's not bring that up. And everyone in the grief space knows that when people pass, the most beautiful thing you can do is say the name of the person to someone that's living, to feel like they're honored and remembered and recognized. And that did not happen in our case.
I remember when my father was literally on his deathbed, and after he passed, I was staying with my mother, who was not his biggest fan. So I was hearing her perspective over here, and all of her stories and all of her stuff. And thankfully, I had one online friend whose mother had passed within the last 3 or 4 years, and she was a lifeline to me, and it gave me enough perspective to go back to my mother and go, I'm having a different experience than you are. I need to have the permission to have something different than what your experience is. And there were questions around the funeral. I'm like, and because they were divorced, he had another partner, and I said, this is my choice. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and stand up for my father. And things you never thought you were going to have to do in life, when you're faced with those circumstances. I want to turn now to, I have a couple of things going on in my head. Let's turn now to things that happen when you're grieving, that to kind of help people understand what, be a detective in their own life and have some self-awareness. Jenny, I wanted to start with you because you listed some things on your website. What are some of the symptoms you've noticed in your clients impacted by grief?
That's such a great question, because I think people assume that the grief is only in the emotional realm, and that's true. But all of us on this call can also attest that it impacts us physically. Like, you're so tired all the time, or maybe it's interrupted your sleep or your eating, right, Susan? Either under eating or overeating. And I think one of the things that's diabolical about grief is that everyone can have different symptoms, right? So it's, you can't know what to expect. In fact, the same person might have different symptoms in different grief experiences. But
Mhm.
the long story short is that grief really impacts emotional, physical, mental, intellectual. I mean, one of the things I get to do is to speak to businesses and individual professionals and let them know that, your cognitive ability on the job is going to be impacted as well. You're probably not making decisions as quickly or as well as you used to. You're probably not cranking through those stacks on your desk as fast as you used to. In addition to all the, other things that might happen, like withdrawal or things like that. So I don't want to list everything, but let's just say it impacts us in every category. And again, it would be helpful for people to know that, both when things start happening to them and when they observe or are caring for other people that are in grief, just to understand that anything and everything can be impacted, and it's going to be unique to each individual.
Mhm. Yeah. Susan, what do you see in the, I mean, it impacts our entire body, but how do you see it impacting people's health?
Well, like we've been talking about in terms of not feeling our feelings and not even knowing what to do with them, not even like Amy didn't even get, like, it wasn't even talked about, like how confusing is that? Like, and so I know for me early on would always just want to avoid, like it hurts so badly that I would, use food. That was mine, but people use work, or, I've used, now I learned I use work too, but to make the feelings go, so we wouldn't have to feel those feelings, and just trying to avoid them. And unless we do learn how to feel them without the story around them, the actual sensation of the feeling in our body, and give ourselves space to kind of feel the feeling and feel our love for the person who's passed, and not the story about that we'll never see them again. Because the brain doesn't get that. Like the brain's like, we'll never see them again. And we could go there, or we could go around the loss, or we can go around. I know my sister with my mom, she has a blended family, and she's kind of sometimes in conflict, not knowing what to do. And she says, I miss mom. Like mom would always tell me I'm doing okay. And she missed that, but I love that she was able to express exactly what that was that she missed. And so understanding that that's what the brain's doing. The brain's trying to, where is this person in space and time, and trying to make sense of it. And yet uncoupling that with feeling them, and that the feeling's okay. It's just trying to find them. Is the activation is like the motivation. It's the same drive you're seeking. Like if water is outside your reach, you just keep wanting that. So there's different mechanisms. One's survival, and then one's the actual feeling and being the human being. And understanding that is what has helped me and some of my clients.
Amy, how does it affect the way we deal with money?
Oh my gosh.
Just a small question.
Right. It's such a financially tender time. And so I honor and I recognize that when I'm working with clients, because I also know that it feels very like it just doesn't matter. They're gone. Right. And people don't want to necessarily deal with thinking about money because it seems so insignificant compared to the life lost. So there is that piece of it. There's also the piece of recognizing that oftentimes the partner that remains or who I'm working with, they weren't prepared financially to understand their accounts, maybe their passwords and all of that. So there's a lot of intentional hand holding, again, because it's a tender time, trying to help people get through the process in the most pain-free way that they can. So there's so many different aspects of money is so important, yet feels so insignificant in compared to the loss. And there's the confusion that can often happen whether if you're the party that doesn't have the understanding. And then there's also those folks that deal with grief in the busy, get it done now, must complete all the tasks. And so it's just being able to morph in the situations to help people and recognize, like everyone here has said, it's going to look different for every person, and honoring that and recognizing there's no wrong way to do this. We just support them in how they're processing.
Yeah.
I'd love to add on to that because there's so much to unpack with the financial aspect. And I think that we brush it off as if we shouldn't be price checking during a funeral. But, with the average cost of a funeral, that's, $7,000 to $12,000, that's a lot of money to just all of a sudden have to come up with. And when you're grieving and you're in that brain fog, you're in that decision paralysis. You don't know, like Amy said, what accounts are out there, how to access those, the unlock code to their phone. And then you're just expected to go in and drop, $7,000 to $12,000 without a thought to it. And can be extremely significant, around that. And, why can't we look at, other ways to help people, during that time and say, okay, here's some other alternatives. So you're not dropping, that amount, of money. And here's some different options, for that. And people are, they have several different studies or several different surveys out there that estimate, it takes several hundred hours to administer an estate, to settle an estate of effort, of time by an executor, an administrator, a trustee, a surviving loved one. That is so extremely unfair to expect that person to be in charge of that amount of decisions, financially, emotionally, during that time, when they are in that space, they are in that brain fog and decision paralysis. And those can have very real world implications. So, that's one of the things that's very close to me and why I created my business around that. Because I see so many of those pain points over and over and over again. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Arlia, can I add one more thing that stems from financial, but really spreads to a lot of other things? So in the grief recovery world, we talk about something called short-term energy relieving behaviors. And they're basically the ways the things we do to soothe ourselves when we're in grief or distress. And let's not forget that some people might act out financially that way, right? Like retail therapy. Does that ring a bell for anybody? That's one of my go-tos. Gambling for some people. Susan knows for other people, it's food or alcohol. Again, either restricting or binging. And so we need to remember the behaviors that people are doing, because I think what we get caught up in is the problem happens when you think that those behaviors that are providing relief in the short term are your long-term solution. We all know someone who's gambling long-term and that's the only way they can soothe their grief, that's going to bring up serious problems in the financial realm. Just like someone who's acting out sexually in the long term, that's going to be a problem. Just like someone who's acting out with food. And acting out is too judgmental of a word. What I really mean to say is they're doing these things because it's the best we know how to do until we get some help or some other alternatives. These are the things that make us feel better. But I try to make people aware that that's not your long-term solution. And if you use it that way, you're going to run into bigger problems beyond the loss that you're experiencing right now.
Yeah, which leads us to finding healthier ways to cope and getting the support you need. Jenny, speak to how you help them shift their behavior into ways that are maybe more self-loving or compassionate.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you that when I first introduced that particular concept to my clients, I'd be sure to say, this is not about judgment. This is not about telling you to stop biting your nails or shopping or whatever it is you're doing to make you feel better. It's just to bring it to your awareness, right? Because many of us go into those patterns that we've used, since we were a baby, soothing ourselves. That's certainly where my food issues and maybe retail issues started. So yeah, the long-term cure is to find a kind of support or a program or an approach that works to help you really process the emotions. I think we've all heard, you have to live through those emotions in order to make them dissipate and go away. The danger is when we try to bury them under the food or the shopping or the work and pretend they don't exist. So again, at the Grief Recovery Institute, we say, our goal is to help as many grievers as possible, as quickly as possible. So I'm deputizing all of you ladies. If you know people that are grieving, let them know that the grief recovery method is one option. I think it's the most effective option as someone who's experienced a lot of grief and tried a lot of different things. And there are others out there. There's programs like Grief Share, where you can get some support at a church you attend. Or there are therapists. I would say that be sure to choose a therapist who is experienced and educated about grief in particular, because there are different things we need to do about grief than other kind of mental health issues that you might be seeing a therapist for. So, but the idea is in our program, we have a way of allowing people to experience those emotions in a very small, bite-sized way, in a very iterative way. It takes at least 6 weeks to go through my program, 1 hour a week at a time. I actually have my people go through it several times with me. But again, here's another analogy I like to say. It's not like they're going on the Maury Povich show and getting all spun up, and then we send you to lunch with a gift card and we hope you're okay after that, right? We've all heard those news stories about the people that are really traumatized by that kind of intervention, right? Where they're bringing up all the feelings and then sending you away in an unhealthy state. So we help people manage through it in a safe space, ideally with a coach or some other safe partner that can encourage you and check in with you and make sure you're okay. So there is a way to experience those emotions, let them out of your system, and then you have, gosh, so much more emotional and physical bandwidth to get back to all the things you care about in life. It's really great.
Thank you. Rachel, talk a little bit about your work, what you find. I had a question here, and I don't know, this might be unfair, but I said, and where is it? There it is. What do families, when they're experiencing grief, you start working with them, what surprises them? Like the things that come up that they didn't expect.
Yeah, well, first and foremost is, if they do have to go to the probate process, how long, how expensive, how laborious it is. So that's a lot. How in the dark they were about accounts, assets, liabilities. Did the house have a mortgage? Did it not? So that, and then, just where to start, what's the sequence, the protocol, what should I be worrying about right now, and what can we sort of kick the can down the road on? So, that's how I work with clients, is to sort of prioritize, streamline, and triage tasks to say, okay, let's not worry about that right now. We're in phase 1, we'll get to phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And them having someone to tell them that, I think, is so extremely helpful. I would have paid anything for that when I lost my mom. So yeah, that's very surprising. What to do with their loved one's stuff. They've been told for years that Hummel figurine collection is priceless and they're going to make lots of money on it, and all those antiques and gold coins. And I like to say, or I hate to say this, but I burst bubbles a lot about, big brown furniture and china and sterling silver. So, they can be so just completely overwhelmed by, oh my goodness, it's coming from every side of what to do with everything and settling someone's affairs.
Yeah. That reminds me of this, when both my parents were gone, it was suddenly like a cultural paradigm just crumbled. And what you're left with is no parents and not the way they raised you, except for whatever you internalized. And then you're left with all this stuff
Yeah.
that just,
And you're also left with sort of this link in the legacy chain that has now been broken, of stories of how are we related to Great Aunt Myrtle, and where did we get that recipe for the rolls that we make every Thanksgiving? And if those haven't been preserved, safeguarded, intentionally beforehand, that's another grieving process of just losing your sort of North Star with those aspects. So it's not just financial, it's not just exchange value, it's not just what does the house have a mortgage and what to do with the Hummel figurine collection, but just sort of the essence of you and your family, and those roots there. And it just can be extremely unsettling.
it definitely was for me. It was very disorienting. I one of the metaphors I use is like when his grief is like you're put on a train and you don't know where it's going and you're not allowed off. Here you are, you're on this train forever now. and so you look around for people who are also on the train who get it.
I like to use the dumpster fire analogy. That's just one of my favorite analogies. I'm kidding. But, then you're left with this flaming dumpster fire of what to do in your grief, and you're looking for a fire extinguisher. You don't, you can't fight, and you're trying to just fan the flames or push them down as much as you can. But yes, so many different aspects of that.
Arlia, I want to jump in and I want to offer a bit of hope. I don't think we have to stay on the train forever. There are things we can do to resolve your grief. And to me, that's one of the myths about grief, is that it never goes away. I'm not here to tell someone it has to go away if they want to cling to it. But for those who don't want to live with it forever, I want to let you know there are effective ways to get over your grief. And that doesn't mean we have to give up the memories that we treasure or the relationship with the person, even if they're physically gone. I think this is the challenge. Our culture has taken the word closure, and we've created a word picture of closure that is this big wooden door, and you slam it closed and you turn away in a huff and you never go back there. Well, that's why people don't want to get rid of their grief, right? Like mom is behind that door, Grammy is behind that door. Important lessons that I learned from that heartbreak are behind that door. So I think that's what makes people think, okay, now I just have to live in this purgatory for the rest of my life. And I'm just here to tell you that doesn't have to be the case. The program that I offer, and I'm sure there are others that can do this too, we offer completion, which is more like a glass revolving door. There's great stuff in that building. I can go through in and out that revolving door anytime I want to revisit those treasured memories, to pull out those lessons learned without getting stuck in grief. That's my hope for people. That's freedom. And that's what lets us, we all have more work to do on this earth, I believe. And that's what gives us the energy and the freedom and the motivation to do that. So I want to offer that word of hope for people.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you used the word curing grief, and that I was curious about that. So I appreciate that picture of being able to resolve the grief and not be disconnected from the relationship or the memories or the lessons. Yeah.
I'd like to offer too, as it relates to finances, that part of what I like to do for clients is to obviously hold space in that tender moment when grief is fresh. But I also encourage them to think about their life beyond that. And let's pause for a moment, skip over in our minds this difficult time, and let's design the life of your dreams, a life that you're looking forward to. Let's pause, because there's going to be some hard steps in here, financial steps, emotional steps, and otherwise. Let's put a pause on that. Let's recognize that that's where we are, but that's not where we're going to stay. And then let's create a financial plan for the life you are going to have after your grieving period is, I won't say over, but is winding down to a completion, and being able to use finances to create that life of joy, to create that purpose for your future. And like Jenny said, I do believe there is a circle of completion. And I actually wrote down glass revolving door because I just love that idea of an analogy for so many things in life, right? For all the difficult things we'd like to slam the door on, it is a glass revolving door. And sometimes we need to dip back in for a moment to remember a lesson and then come back out. And that is kind of how I will look at, the financial period. There is a life of your dreams beyond your grief. And if you are fortunate enough to have finances that someone has left you from a generational wealth perspective, or even if not, let's design what your life is going to look like and how you're going to get there past this period, whether you have or don't have assets to start with. And so I think it's really important to honor the time and to encourage folks to see past that. And from my perspective and what I do, it's financially. But again, I just wanted to kind of share that anecdote.
Thank you so much. Susan, when it comes to people grieving and dealing with their health issues, how do you work with them?
Well, I love what all of y'all are saying, because it's so kind of in alignment with what I love. Jenny understands that nature of feeling those feelings. And then Amy, I really love what you said, because it's almost like you're creating something new. And I remember out of birthing something. And I remember when I would go to funerals and, people's houses after someone had passed, there was always a baby. And I always noted that new life, and it was just kind of a life cycle. So just honoring that there is an expectation of death. Like there's nobody who doesn't die. There's nobody that doesn't suffer in some way on this earth. That is our humanity. So for me, it's about embracing our humanity and not looking for us to be this perfect, what did you say? The Academy Award griever. Yeah. That how we do it perfectly. And I think we're not comfortable with our feelings, and learning to be messy is okay. Messy is part of creating something new. Messy is part of, living, going in and out of that door. God, messy is part of the admin of it. Oh, I can't, and that's okay. It's just okay to be messy. It's that is your experience. And not to try and fix it. No one's broken because you're sad, or the depth of your sadness. And I think what I encourage people is to feel the depth of their sadness without having it mean something about themselves.
Yeah. I like
that ability to feel that is what can help us the most.
Yeah. I like what you said earlier, because it's part of the practices that I do and teach. And that is disconnecting the story from the feelings. Because when you allow those feelings to be and give yourself the grace and compassion to have them, and are able to at least maybe temporarily disconnect them from the story and all the thoughts, then they move more quickly and don't get stuck and create more suffering.
They actually dissipate in about 90 seconds, the sensation of anger or sadness. If you sit with it, not go up here, it'll dissipate. Here it's just a cognitive loop that just keeps going and going and going. Yeah. But and feeling that, yeah. So I say an analogy is like taking out a splinter, how badly it hurts, to get the whole thing out. But I remember my son, went to camp. He comes home from camp and he didn't get the whole thing out because it hurt too much. So he left it in, and of course, gets infected. Yeah. And that's what we do if we don't kind of touch, be brave. It's hard to touch those emotions, but I love what Jenny said, do it at small little periods of time so it's manageable, and being surrounded by support is really cool. So
yeah,
I think a splinter is a really good analogy for what we've been talking about, how if you let it sit there and fester, but there are things you can do in the short term, and you can go back and fix it in the long term. But yeah, that's a really good word picture.
It might be a little hard to find in the moment, but
it's worth digging for.
Yeah. Rachel, you want to share a little bit more about about your work and how you support people through their process?
Yeah, absolutely. I created what I felt were services that I needed when I was going through, the process of settling my parents and my uncle's estates that didn't exist out there. And I was beating my head against the wall. Why doesn't this exist? And so I've sort of created this customized project management support that walks clients one-on-one, one size fits one support to help them triage, manage, and streamline. I know I've said tasks about 300 times in this podcast, but we're going to say it again.
'Cause they're there.
They're there. They're unavoidable. Yeah. So helping them, like I said, to really identify, like if I had a magic wand, what are the three things that I could take away from you right now? Let's come up with a customized roadmap to create steps and phases. And then also me exposing possible knowledge gaps or blind spots that they haven't thought about to help really comprehensively, holistically settle a loved one's affairs. And that can look from, reaching out to Xfinity and closing down that account, or overseeing an entire estate clean out, to faxing, mailing all those death certificates that everybody wants the original of, and sending those off, and wallpapering the world with those death certificates, as I like to sometimes say. So really just leaning into that red tape and that bureaucracy that is so frustrating when you lose a loved one. Sometimes that takes in the form of me calling and yelling at a company so that they don't have to do that, and they don't have to go through that trauma of my loved one died and this is why I'm calling, and no, he or she can't get on the phone. So sometimes it's saving them from that step. So it can be as simple, as complex. And my typical engagement is a 6-month engagement that I work with clients. As I said, it takes a lot longer than people anticipate. But I, of course, think that this is a service that everybody needs. They just don't know they need. And I'm here to shout it from the rooftops that we're here, that after loss professionals are here, and we're here to help you. Death is hard enough. We shouldn't make it harder than it already is.
Absolutely. All right, ladies, as we wind down, I'd love to kind of get a nugget of wisdom, maybe something you recognize people who are grieving need to hear, or maybe you wish you had heard when you were in the midst of deep grief. Oh, and
grief is, yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. And then if you've got a favorite resource that you can pass along, a book or something, feel free to do that as well. Go ahead, Jenny.
No, go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to piggyback on a conversation we just had a minute ago, and I'm going to use a pithy saying that says, forget about being strong. How about being human? Oh, Susan, one thing you said, a couple of things you said struck me. Number one, we know everyone's going to die. Why do we all pretend that it's so foreign and any of us are going to either not experience it ourselves or in our loved ones? And number two, we all know we're human, but again, we're not embracing everything it means to be human, which is to allow ourselves to feel all the messy, conflicting emotions that go along with being human. And so I encourage people to be brave to try that. I know it's hard and scary. And the resource that I will list is griefrecoverymethod.com. You can go there to find out about the program that I'm so enthusiastic about, and to find a directory of people like myself that are certified to help you implement it. And I promise it won't kill you. You'll come out stronger and happier and better on the other side. There is hope for the future.
Beautiful.
I'll say, and I don't mean to be quip at all about this, but when I say this too shall pass, what I mean by that is, if you think about all the beautiful moments in your life, they're as fleeting as the hard moments in your life. So you get to experience the ups and the downs, and grief is one of the worst places to be. but I can, having experienced grief and having experienced very high highs in life, I can confirm, as we all can, and everyone knows, we just might need the reminder that this too shall pass. So the hard moments go away, the good moments come, the good moments go away, and the hard ones come. But just know that it won't feel this way forever. And as far as resources go, I mean, of course, I would recommend someone like Jenny or someone like Rachel to clients that are in a process that are struggling, right? Reach out. There are resources. Back in the 90s, there didn't feel like resources. And nowadays, they're at your fingertips. And I often tell people, when you don't feel good, you go to the doctor. If your car's not working, you go to the mechanic. People struggle with asking for help around their money. And I think grief is probably another one where people feel like it's something they should know how to do. And yet there's not really a handbook, but you can find ways to ease the quote suffering or ease that emotional feeling with using your resources wisely, like contacting a Jenny or a Rachel. So
There actually is a handbook. It's called the Grief Recovery Handbook.
There you go.
Leave it to Jenny to know.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, and just to piggyback on that, you do not have to do this alone. You can outsource some of this stuff by leveraging after loss professionals, like me. Hopefully, if you're lucky, you're only going to have to settle a loved one's affairs maybe once in your life. Why reinvent the wheel? Why try to streamline and create all these processes yourself? Lean into someone, to a profession that has does this day in and day out. Like I said, you do not have to do this alone. You don't have to put your head down and take care of everything that either your loved ones failed to take care of while they were alive, or you just don't know what to do with those tasks. As far as a great resource, I have a great comprehensive after loss checklist on my website that you can get for free at blackdressconsultants.com. And also, I love the local nonprofit lovenotlost.org. And they are a great nonprofit that they provide free photography sessions for anyone, any family facing a terminal illness, as well as grief support and tools to really revolutionize the way we live and deal with grief.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So I love all these resources that I now have for people. So thank you guys. It's been amazing to be on this panel. And I think what I've learned from my experiences is to have so much more compassion for others that I didn't have before. And like, I think Rachel said, it's part of a club that you didn't wish, you didn't want to be in, but having that compassion. And I remember when I lost my mom, I heard so many stories about other moms. Like I got to know so many moms on, in that I wouldn't have known had I not lost my mom. So I love being able to understand people in a different way that I didn't before. And I love having now y'all as support tools for my, people I know going through it, because it's beautiful.
Thank you, Susan. Well, for me, I love everything y'all have said. I don't have a particular piece of advice, do I? I think it would be that there is always help. There's always help. To remember you are never alone, even when it feels like it. There is always some way to find help. Thank you, especially now. And we have so many more resources at our fingertips. I know in the midst of my grief, I started following all the accounts I could find on Instagram, right, with all those great memes to support me at any time when I needed it. And there are two of them. Well, there's one of them. It's Megan Devine. Her account is Refuge in Grief, but her book is It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And I love that book. It's very helpful. But because of my own experiences, I've rolled in grief counseling to my work. Can really help support and walk with someone through that process when they need it. Ladies, any final parting thoughts before we go? We feel good. Thank you so much for your presence, your expertise, your vulnerability, and the good work you're doing in the world. I am grateful. And that's going to do it for us today. Please feel free to check out the show notes. I will have their full bios, all their contact information, their websites, all the resources we've listed so that you can use them yourself and pass them along to people you know who are grieving. I'll just remind you to, be compassionate with yourself and with the people in your life who may be grieving. And I don't remember who said it. What's that quote? Be kind, because you never know what somebody else is, what battle they're fighting. So that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Women's Sanctuary, and we'll see you here again next time.